Our gospel reading for this morning comes from Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" This is the gospel of our Lord. You can be seated. Well, it sounds like a dispute you would see settled on the Jerry Springer show, right? Or maybe Judge Judy. I'm not really sure which one it falls into. The younger son wants out from under the thumb of his dad. He knows that under their laws, as the youngest of 2 sons, he's entitled to 1/3 of his dad's wealth when he dies. So he goes to his father, and he essentially tells him, "Dad, I wish you were dead. I wish you were dead so that I could have my money and that I could be free from you." See, this is the first place right away, before the son even leaves. This is where we see what it looks like to be lost. Because when the son looked at his father, he didn't see him for the relationship between them. He didn't see him for the love that should have been there. He saw his father for what his father had to offer him. He didn't want a relationship with his father. He didn't care how much his father loved him. All he wanted from his father was his stuff. So he told him, "Dad, give me my wealth so I can leave." You can imagine how shocked the father must have been. His son, whom he had loved since before he was born, whom he had taken care of his entire life, whom he had provided for so richly, now wants nothing to do with him. But what could he do? He couldn't force his son to love him. He couldn't force a relationship on him. So he let him go. He divided his property between the 2 sons. It would have been a process that would have been incredibly shameful and embarrassing for the father, because this was not writing a check for money that was sitting in a bank account. This was dividing his land and all of his possessions. So someone, whether it was him or his son, after this division has taken place, would have to go out and liquidate those assets. He would have to sell off some of the family's livestock. He would have to sell off a third of the family's land that they had been on for generations. It would have been incredibly shameful. And yet the father did it. You can imagine him pleading with his son this whole time, saying, don't do this. Don't alienate yourself from the people like me who love you. Don't burn these bridges with the village around you. The village would have gotten a front row seat to all of this drama. Some of them would have been the people who bought that land or that property, and they would have known that there was all of this drama going on in that household. They would have gotten a front row seat, and it would have brought incredible shame and dishonor on the father's name. But he knew that he could do nothing about it. The son's mind was made up, and so with his newly stuffed wallet, the son went off and tried to break free. Because when it came down to it, that's what he wanted. He wanted freedom more than he wanted a relationship with anyone else. He wanted to exercise his newfound freedom. That's the next thing we learn about being lost, is that being lost is often disguised as freedom. It must have been exciting at first, being able to go wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted, with whoever he wanted. It always is exciting when you get to exercise a new freedom. When you're driving down the road by yourself after you get your driver's license, when you buy your first drink after turning 21, it's exciting to exercise this newfound freedom. But it wasn't long before the money was gone. And when the money was gone, his freedom was gone. Pretty soon his quest for freedom brought him to a pig pen. And standing in the mud with the pigs, longing to be able to eat the pods of the things that the pigs were eating, longing to fill his stomach with their food, and yet not even being able to get that, he came to his senses. He started to weigh his options, and he started to realize he only had one option. He had to go back home. It wouldn't be easy. He would have to face all of those villagers who tried to warn him not to do this. He'd have to face his brother, who would be even more unbearable now after hearing the latest thing that his black sheep younger brother did. And worst of all, he'd have to face his father, whom he had betrayed. But standing in that pig pen, he realized that that was his only option. He realized, looking back, how great he had it back at home. He had longed for freedom. He longed to break free from his father's house, but now he realized that even the servants in his father's house had it better than he has it now. So he started to think, how was he going to repair this relationship with his father? How was he going to get his father to not chase him off the second he saw him? He decided he didn't deserve to be a son. He knew that, so he would offer to be a servant. He'd offer to live not in the house with the family, but off in some other section of his father's property where he could live and he could work off the debt that he owed to his father. So he started home, probably rehearsing the speech the entire time he was walking back. You have to imagine his father's heartbreak during this time just growing and growing and growing. With every day and every week that passed by without hearing from his son, his hope that his son would come back started to fade away. The optimistic part of him still thought that maybe his son was going to come back, but the rational part of his brain was telling him that he had to assume he was dead. Still, he couldn't help himself from looking out every day to the end of the road, as far as he could see, in hopes that one day he'd see his son walking toward him. And then one day he did. And when he did, he took off running. Never mind the fact that patriarchs in that culture do not run. Men above the age of 25 in that culture do not run, because to do that, he would have had to pull up his robes, exposing his legs, which would have been incredibly shameful to all the people who saw him pass by. Never mind all of that. Not one of those thoughts crossed his mind. He just took off running. When he got to him, the Greek says he fell upon his neck. He lunged forward at him, wrapped him in a hug with tears in his eyes, and started to kiss him. The son couldn't even get all of his speech out. He got the first part. He told him, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son." But before he could even offer to be a servant in his father's house, his dad had put a ring on his finger, a robe on his back, sandals on his feet, and ordered the fattened calf to be killed. Pretty soon, he was at a party with the whole village. They didn't have chest freezers back in that day, and a fattened calf is a lot of meat, so they had to invite everyone over, the entire village, the village that would have been ready to kick him out onto the streets if he ever showed his face again. In front of every one of those people, the father said, "This is my son. Welcome him back. Treat him as if he had never left." You have to imagine that at some point during that day, whether it was out on the road when he saw his father running toward him, or in that banquet hall surrounded by all of those people welcoming him with open arms, it had to hit the son. He had to realize that this is what he had been missing. When he set out on his journey to find freedom, he found it. He found freedom. He found pleasures to satisfy his desires. He found people to party with, but he never found this. He never found this unconditional love that he was experiencing right now. This is what he had been missing all along. But while this grace, this unconditional love was an overwhelming relief to the younger son, it was outrageous to the older son. He throws a fit. He refuses to come inside the banquet. As the older son in that culture, it was his job to be kind of the master of ceremonies at events like this. And so him refusing to come in would have been a public slap in the face to his father in front of all those people at the banquet. And so his father, again opening himself up to shame and disgrace, commits the social faux pas of leaving all of his guests inside and going out to beg his son to come in. He begs him, "Please come inside. Please don't do this," but his son is furious. You can look through this lesson and you can see the word father all over it, but the one place it's conspicuously missing is right here. The son does not address his father as father. He says, "Look, look." And he won't even call his brother. He says, "This son of yours who wasted your wealth is back now, and you're throwing him a party when I've done everything you've ever asked of me. I never left home, and you wouldn't even give me a goat to have a party with my friends." He's furious. And this is where you start to see that the younger brother and the older brother actually have a lot in common. See, neither one of them actually wanted a relationship with their father. Neither one of them viewed their father in terms of a relationship. They both viewed their relationship with him as a means to an end. They both just wanted his stuff. The younger son did everything wrong. The older son did everything right. But they were both lost. They were both in the wrong, even though the older son did everything right. And that's why the name of this parable has started to change. Maybe you've noticed it. When I was growing up, this was always referred to as the parable of the prodigal son. Now, depending on what Bible you have, it's sometimes referred to as the parable of the lost son. And then you can debate which one of the two sons is more lost. Other times it's referred to as the parable of the two sons. But either way, the reason they're changing the name of this parable is because it's not just about the prodigal son. It's not just about the one who does everything wrong. It's also about the one who did everything right, but for the wrong reasons. It's also about the prideful son. And so you can debate which name of the parable you like better, whether it's the prodigal son or the two sons or the lost son. But ultimately, none of those names really capture what this parable is actually about. Because it's not about the sons at all. You heard me say it before, the word father is used 12 times in this parable. It's the father who, to both sons, is constantly opening himself up to shame and disgrace, who's constantly going through anything he can to save his sons. It's the father who shows his patience and forgiveness. It's the father who longingly waits for his son to come home and immediately runs to him the second he sees him. It's the father who begs his older son not to distance himself from him, but who's constantly trying to bring his sons together. And even though they didn't view him in the way that he viewed them, even though they never loved him the way that he loved them, he just kept on loving. That's what this parable is about. It's about God's grace. It's about his condemnation-crushing love. It's about his patience, waiting for his sons to come home and then forgiving them when they do. And that is your God. That Father is your God. He is the patient and loving and forgiving God who longs for you to return when you wander off and is there for you with open arms to welcome you home when you come back. He's the Father who's willing to bear the shame that you deserved at every turn so that he can save you. He's the Father who wants nothing more than for you to return to him and for you to experience his love for you. He's the Father who doesn't want to condemn you. He wants to forgive you. He's the Father who is willing to sacrifice his own son so that prodigal sons and prideful sinners like you and me can be welcomed home with open arms. So there are some of you here today who are standing in the mud in a far-off country. You're standing in the mud because you don't think that you could ever look in God's face again after what you've done. You're standing there because you've seen him forgive other people. You've seen how he loves other people, but there's a part of you that doesn't believe that he could really forgive you. You followed your desire for freedom, and it led you into enslavement, to addiction, or into a cycle of sin, and now you don't think that you could ever come home. If that's where you are today, I'm here to tell you to come home. I'm here to tell you that your Father is waiting for you. That when he sees you, he's not going to chase you off. He's not going to condemn you. He's going to run toward you with open arms and tears in his eyes. He's going to wrap you in a hug, and he's going to say, welcome home. He's going to put a ring on your finger and sandals on your feet, a robe on your back. He's going to say, this child of mine who was dead is alive again. This child who was lost is found. So if that's where you're standing today, come home. But I know there are also some of you who are standing outside the party today. There's a party going on inside, but you're not in there because you're not comforted by God's grace. In fact, you're kind of offended by it. You're looking at the people that God has forgiven and thinking about how much they don't deserve it. You're looking at yourself and your own obedience to God's commands, your morality, your success in life, and thinking that all those prodigals out there have a lot to learn from you. If that's where you're standing today, I'm here to urge you to realize that the grace of God that He wants to give you is for people who are lost. And if you're standing out there, you're just as lost as the prodigal son. I'm here to tell you that you can be lost without ever leaving home. And so if that's where you are today, I want to invite you into the party to see the grace of God, to celebrate over the fact that His grace found another lost sinner, a sinner who was just as lost as you were. Wherever you're standing today, whoever you identify with more, the prodigal son or the prideful son, I want you to see the forgiving grace of your Father. I want you to see Him longing for you to return home. I want you to see His immediate love the second He sees a sinner turning back to Him. I want you to see Him running towards sinners and welcoming them with open arms. And I want you to know that whether you're standing far off or close by, wherever you are, your Father is eagerly waiting for you to come home. I want you to see His patience and His forgiveness and His grace. And I want you to know that that is your God. That is what His grace looks like, and that is the reason that we celebrate here every Sunday. So whoever you are, whichever son you are, I want to welcome you home. Because we were dead and are alive again. We were lost, but now we're found. Praise God for that. Amen.